هكلمك تاني. سلام. هلو تيست. هلو هلو تيست. هلو هلو تيست. هلو هلو تيست 1 2 3 4. هلو تيست. هلو هلو تيست. لسه ما اشتغلش. هلو تيست. هلو
very this position on mass endemic finance has been critical. First of all, I wanted to talk about the pledges. We see that the bets that Scotland announced last year is actually paying off. Over the past few days, we've seen about 10 pledges made by different countries, including quite a few European countries, on mass endemic finance. Of course, the amount is very minimal. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars when we actually would need billions of dollars. But it's an important step, and I wanted to actually say that among the different pledges, it's only EU governments which are pledges that were actually new and additional, and not redirecting money that was initially allocated for mitigation and adaptation, which is exactly what we're asking for. Today there is a lot of emphasis on the global shield, and actually many of the pledges from EU countries are going to this global shield, which we think is an interesting initiative, but also with limitations, because it relies, of course, a lot on insurance mechanisms. We are, of course, really looking at the V20 fund under the global shield, which I think has quite some, good prospect to deliver grant-based finance to vulnerable populations. So on the negotiations themselves, I first wanted to raise the issue of the Santiago network on mass damage after the really difficult situation we had on the Santiago network at the Bonn session. We've seen a lot of progress this week, and we're really actually close to getting agreements. And actually, the EU has been shifting its position on the advisory board, which is very much welcome and was very important for vulnerable countries. And we heard this morning there is only one party left, which is against the Santiago network. But now, one important point that we heard from EU negotiators this morning on damage finance on the Santiago network is the emphasis that is put by developing countries to not reduce the possibility to access technical support from the Santiago network only to the most vulnerable countries, which is what EU member states are pushing for. Vulnerable countries are saying that it would be too restrictive at this stage, and it will be the role of the advisory board to actually make a selection based on vulnerability criteria, and we should not reduce the number of countries from this decision at COP27. So it would be really good to have your support, your back, in talking to EU member states, that they should understand that vulnerable countries know that there are different levels of vulnerabilities, but this is not what the issue is at this COP. And on mass and damage finance, the EU remains very clear that they don't see the necessity of having a decision on the facility at this COP. They would rather invest in a process with dialogues, with workshops, with submissions, and potentially have a decision on funding arrangement. It doesn't mean a facility either by next year or the year after. This is not what we came here for. This is not what other countries came here for. They know we need to have a decision and use the Glasgow dialogue and a potential creation of a new expert group to look into how to operationalize the facility so that it is actually operationalized by COP29. So we know that if we have another 2 years of discussions, then it would take another 2 or more 3 years to actually look at how the facility would look like. So, and we cannot waste that time. It is impossible. So we've seen the EU showing that there needs to be a political decision in this COP, so they shouldn't really miss the targets. Thank you. Thank you, Fanny. And I'm sure also that I didn't mention, but we are also able then to also answer clarification questions. Rachel.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Rachel from Climate Action Network Europe Secretariat, and I'll just give a brief overview of some of the finance agenda items and issues which have been coming into play in one. I think maybe to emphasize first is we have a climate finance ministerial going on right now in Milano, where ministers are coming together to look at the 100 commitment as part of the long-term finance work program. it's really important to have this space for accountability because of the failure to deliver, and as CAN and developing country parties were very clear that that commitment should be delivered in full, which means $600 billion over 2020 to 25. So shortfalls in early years should be made up for, and ambition shouldn't be weakened. I guess key concerns in that discussion around the 100 billion is that we've seen some proposals from the US in particular, from John Kerry, about ideas on using carbon credits from private companies for climate finance, over-egging the role of mobilised finance and the private sector. It's been good to see some EU member states, for example, representatives from Germany, speaking out against that. But I think it would also be good to hear more of a challenge to that narrative and more of a focus on public finance from the EU. In terms of the rest of the discussion, I mean, it's again important to emphasize that finance should be new and additional to development finance and humanitarian aid. That there should be a better quality of finance. So, I mean, these are all things that came up in the Parliament position. So, more of a focus on grants-based finance, particularly for adaptation, and delivering on gender equality. And another key item on the finance side is the discussions on the new collective quantified goal, which should come in to replace the 100 billion. This is a process that should be finalised in 2024, but the dynamic is not good. The process is not really working so far, and developed country parties are quite happy, I think, to sit back and not drive forward the processes in a constructive way. I really fear that we'll end up in a mess in 2024 when it comes time to finalise that goal. So again, it would be good to see the EU being more constructive in this process, not just hiding behind Switzerland and the US, and listening to the proposals that developed country parties are coming up with about how to set up a better process in 2023 with milestones and specific topics to look at. And then finally, to talk about the cover decision and two issues which didn't make it onto the agenda. So firstly, adaptation finance and a proposal from the African group of negotiators to look at that doubling. That doesn't really have a home at the moment. It's coming up in different discussions, but there's not enough space for it. It would be, I think, really good to see a roadmap or an implementation on how to deliver on the doubling adaptation finance commitment and keep it growing to at least 50% of public climate finance in the cover decision text. And another issue is Article 2.1c, so shifting all financial flows. A proposal from the EU and the EIG to have that on the agenda didn't make it on. That was partly because it wasn't clear what they wanted from it, partly because of concerns that it would be used as a distraction from the public finance contributions. As CAN, we really want to see Article 2.1c somewhere at COP27. It's really important to have the space to address fossil fuel finance and to build on the Glasgow Climate Pact. But in order to move forward, there needs to be a much stronger recognition of how this should support the just transition, energy access, and open up fiscal space for developing countries to get finance flowing where they need it. And also considering the debt crisis and how we can anchor in some language there to try to get things moving on debt relief. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. Kasia on mitigation.
Thank you, Chiara, and good afternoon, everyone. So, on mitigation, this COP needs to accelerate action. The world has heard all the news about how countries are not delivering on 1.5, how their action is nowhere near what is needed, and they will be looking for something, some hopeful signals from this conference, regardless, some signs of the fact that, things may and they must accelerate. Now, the place where countries are dealing with the mitigation gap is currently the mitigation work program. And, a strong work program would be one where countries promise to come back every year until the mitigation gap is closed. And one that, truly addressed barriers and created opportunities, and, for example, addressed different sectors. So you would get a view into the energy sector, for example, and you would get to discuss those key messages from International Energy Agency, for example, on what are the benchmarks we need to follow on the energy sector to get on track with 1.5. So those are key elements we want to see in the mitigation work program. But let's be honest, even if the mitigation work program decision was relatively strong, that will not be enough for the world outside. They will not, understand how can this another work program. So we need definitely something stronger, and there all eyes are now on the cover decision. And there we need to build on the Glasgow Climate Pact and not just repeat what was there. So you will remember the big debate around last year around the fossil fuel phase-out debate, which eventually turned into language on coal phase down and fossil fuel subsidies phase out. And that is already something that was, as you know, it was the first time that, fossil fuel phase out was even acknowledged in any way in the context of COP. But this time it's time to take the next step and talk about and get strong language on all fossil fuel phase out. And I'm very happy that the EU did raise this in the presidential consultations on Saturday, and we hope that you members of Parliament will help the EU to remain strong on this, that it's all fossil fuel phase out that ends up as language in the cover decision. Then, of course, there will need to be also language on just transition and means of implementation and all that, but the core message, that is what the International Energy has been trying to push through, the IPCC has tried to push through, but it hasn't found a home yet within the UNFCCC, and this time we can get there. The fact that India on Saturday said that they want to see fossil fuel phase down is already something that the EU can definitely play with and try to find allies around, India, the EU, and island states, others. We know that the reasons why India proposed this are probably because they feel it's more fair to talk about all fossil fuels than just coal. But that's good enough reason for us. Whatever the reason, let's just, get the fossil fuel phase out there. Thank you.
Good afternoon.